One morning, a stack of blank paper was placed on a wooden table inside the camp, and when the translator explained that each prisoner could write home again, several men hesitated with their pens in hand, unsure how to begin a letter after months of silence and uncertainty. The announcement was delivered in the same measured tone used for other routine matters, yet the meaning behind it felt different because communication with home carried weight that no scheduled activity could match. The prisoners gathered around the table in small groups, not pushing forward, but standing close enough to see the paper clearly, as if confirming that the opportunity was real. Blank sheets were placed in neat stacks, along with simple pencils, and the sight of those ordinary objects created a quiet shift in posture and expression among the men. For many of them, months had passed without direct contact, and during that time imagination often filled the gaps left by silence. They had thought about families, about cities altered by war, and about whether letters sent earlier had ever reached their destination. Now, with paper in front of them, the abstract idea of communication became concrete. A blank page can feel heavier than a full one, especially when the words written on it must carry both reassurance and restraint. The translator explained that letters would be inspected and sent according to regulations, and that certain topics were not permitted, which clarified the boundaries without diminishing the opportunity itself. The rules were not surprising, since most soldiers understood that correspondence during wartime followed formal channels. Even so, knowing that someone would read their words before they traveled across borders added a layer of caution to what they chose to express. Some prisoners sat immediately and began writing slowly, forming careful lines as if rediscovering the rhythm of handwriting after long interruption. Others remained standing for a moment, thinking before committing anything to paper. It is difficult to condense months of experience into a few controlled sentences, especially when the purpose of the letter is to reassure rather than to explain. The men understood that their families would search each line for signs of safety and stability. The atmosphere in the room stayed quiet, not tense but concentrated, with the soft scratch of pencil against paper replacing the usual background sounds. Writing demands focus, and focus can quiet restless thoughts. Even those who had little to say found themselves composing simple messages about health and routine, choosing neutral words that conveyed steadiness without detail. Neutral language felt safer under inspection. A few older prisoners wrote more slowly, pausing often as if selecting each word with care, since written communication can carry emotion more strongly than spoken conversation. They understood that the letter might be read multiple times by loved ones, becoming a physical reminder that they were alive and present somewhere far away. That awareness shaped their tone. When the time came to collect the pages, the men handed them over without protest, accepting the inspection process as part of the system they were learning to navigate. The act of writing had already fulfilled part of its purpose, because it transformed uncertainty into expression, even if limited. Expression, even controlled, can lighten mental strain. As they returned to their barracks, several prisoners seemed more thoughtful than before, not because their situation had changed, but because the possibility of connection had been reopened. A single sheet of paper had introduced a new dimension to daily life, showing that captivity did not entirely erase communication. Within the structured rules of the camp, letters became another organized routine, one that connected fenced yards with distant homes through measured lines of ink. In the days after the first letters were written, the act of correspondence became a scheduled part of camp life rather than a single emotional moment, because the administration established regular intervals for writing, collection, and distribution, and once something enters a schedule, it begins to shape expectations. The prisoners learned which days allowed outgoing mail and which days were reserved for incoming letters, and this pattern quietly divided long weeks into smaller segments marked by anticipation. The inspection process was visible but not dramatic. as envelopes were gathered neatly and reviewed before being sent onward through official channels. And although the men understood that certain topics would be removed or censored, the clarity of the rules reduced speculation. When boundaries are clearly stated, people adjust their language accordingly rather than testing limits. Most letters remained simple, focused on health, routine, and reassurance, because those themes traveled safely through regulated systems. Waiting for replies introduced a different kind of rhythm into the camp, one built on patience rather than activity, since international mail could take weeks or months to arrive. During that time, men often replayed in their minds the sentences they had written, wondering how they might be received, and imagining their families opening envelopes somewhere far away. Imagination filled the quiet space between sending and receiving, and this mental activity connected present routine with distant homes. When the first replies arrived, distribution was handled with the same procedural tone as other announcements. Yet the effect on the prisoners was noticeable in subtle ways, because a letter bearing familiar handwriting confirmed that communication flowed both directions. The envelopes were often worn from travel, stamped and marked by various authorities, yet the handwriting on the front carried a sense of continuity. Holding a letter is different from remembering a face, since paper provides physical proof of connection. Some prisoners read their letters slowly, scanning each line with measured attention, while others read quickly at first and then returned to the beginning to absorb details. The content was usually cautious and practical, shaped by similar restrictions on the home front. Yet even ordinary descriptions of weather, work, or family routines carried emotional weight. Ordinary details can feel extraordinary when distance separates people. The atmosphere in the barracks shifted slightly on distribution days, not becoming loud or celebratory, but quieter and more focused as men sat on their bunks reading or rereading their pages. Reading requires concentration, and concentration temporarily narrows attention to words and meaning. In that narrowed focus, the fences and yard felt less immediate, replaced by mental images of towns and households described in ink. Those who did not receive letters on a given day often remained calm, understanding that delays were common, and this understanding prevented disappointment from turning into tension. Predictable systems helped maintain patience, since men knew that mail followed routes and schedules beyond the camp's control. Patience became part of adaptation. Over time, the exchange of letters formed a steady bridge between two worlds, structured and regulated but real, and this bridge added a layer of continuity to camp life. The men learned to place correspondence alongside meals, work, and rest as one more element in the organized routine shaping their days. Within limits, communication offered perspective, reminding them that beyond barbed wire and inspection stamps, families continued living, waiting, and writing back. As correspondence settled into routine, the prisoners began to notice how writing and receiving letters influenced their daily conversations, because once communication reopened, thoughts that had remained internal for months found structured expression. Men compared the frequency of mail, discussed how long deliveries seemed to take, and quietly exchanged advice about phrasing sentences carefully within regulations. These exchanges were not emotional in tone, yet they revealed how strongly the act of writing shaped their mental focus. The restrictions attached to correspondence required discipline, since certain subjects were not allowed and references to camp specifics were limited, and this forced the prisoners to think about how to convey reassurance without detail. Writing within boundaries demands precision, and precision can strengthen clarity. Many chose to describe simple elements of routine, such as work assignments or health, because these details communicated stability without inviting censorship. Receiving letters often brought a subtle shift in posture and attention, as men would hold the envelope for a moment before opening it, as if recognizing the distance it had traveled. The paper sometimes carried creases from inspection or markings from various transit points, Yet those signs only emphasize the journey. A letter becomes more than text when it passes through time and distance, arriving as proof that connection persists. Some prisoners began keeping their letters carefully folded and stored among their few belongings, reading them again during quieter evenings, because written words can be revisited in ways spoken words cannot. Repetition of reading can reinforce memory and strengthen a sense of continuity. In a setting where days resemble one another, small personal objects gain importance. The presence of correspondence also altered how the men thought about time, since writing today meant imagining someone reading weeks later, and receiving a letter meant reading words written weeks earlier. This overlap of past and present created a layered sense of time, connecting two environments through delayed exchange. Delayed exchange requires patience, and patience becomes part of adaptation. Not every letter carried joyful news, as families often described shortages, work demands, or uncertainty of their own. Yet even neutral or difficult information was valued because it grounded imagination in reality. Imagined fears often feel heavier than confirmed facts. Confirmation, even of hardship, can steady the mind by replacing speculation with knowledge. The camp administration maintained the same procedural handling of mail, collecting and distributing without commentary, and this neutrality reinforced that correspondence was part of regulation rather than favor. Regulation, when steady, allows expectations to remain consistent. Consistency reduces emotional extremes in confined settings. Over time, writing and reading became integrated into the broader pattern of camp life, shaping how prisoners organized their thoughts and measured weeks. Letters did not alter their circumstances, yet they provided a structured link to the outside world, reminding them that their identities extended beyond camp records and assigned numbers. Within the limits of inspection and delay, communication formed a quiet bridge, one built not from open gates, but from carefully chosen words moving steadily across distance. As correspondence continued over the following months, the act of writing began to shape not only what the prisoners said, but how they thought about their own experience. Because when a man prepares to explain his situation to someone far away, he must organize it into clear and controlled language. This process of organization can steady the mind, since scattered impressions become structured sentences. Even within censorship limits, shaping experience into words requires reflection. Many prisoners developed a personal routine around letter writing, choosing a consistent place in the barracks and writing at similar times of day, often after work assignments when the atmosphere was calmer. Establishing a writing routine added another predictable layer to weekly life. Predictability helps preserve balance in confined environments, and balance supports endurance over long periods. Some men carefully planned what they would write days in advance, composing sentences mentally while walking in the yard or completing tasks, because once paper was available, time for writing could be limited. Planning ahead reduced hesitation and ensured that essential reassurance would be included. Reassurance was often the primary goal, since families reading those letters would search for signs of safety and stability. The awareness of inspection remained present but no longer dominated thought, because by this stage the prisoners understood the boundaries clearly and adjusted naturally to them. Adjusting to rules does not mean forgetting them. It means incorporating them into habit. Habit reduces mental friction, allowing focus to shift toward content rather than restriction. Receiving letters continued to mark certain days with quiet significance. Distribution was handled efficiently, yet the moment an envelope changed hands often slowed perception for the recipient, as familiar handwriting confirmed that life outside continued with its own rhythm. That confirmation reinforced identity, reminding each man that he belonged to a wider world beyond camp routines. In the evenings, some prisoners reread earlier letters in dim light, tracing lines with their eyes as if reinforcing connection through repetition. Repetition can deepen meaning, especially when physical contact with loved ones is impossible. The paper itself became a tangible link, something that could be folded, stored, and returned to during long stretches of silence. Those who experienced delays without reply often relied on patience shaped by the known mail schedule, understanding that routes and inspections added time beyond anyone's control. This shared understanding reduced frustration and prevented speculation from escalating. Clear systems, even slow ones, are easier to accept than unpredictable ones. By now, correspondence had become part of the structural rhythm of the camp, standing alongside work, meals, and recreation as another regulated element. It did not remove uncertainty about the future, yet it provided a measured channel through which connection could continue. Within strict boundaries, letters created continuity, and continuity supports resilience when circumstances cannot be changed. As the pattern of correspondence continued over an extended period, the prisoners began to recognize that letters were not only exchanges of information, but quiet anchors in time, because each outgoing message marked a moment of intention, and each incoming reply marked a point of confirmation, creating a sequence that stretched across months. In environments where days can blur together, sequences matter, since they give shape to otherwise repetitive time. Writing became less about novelty and more about maintaining that sequence. The men understood that every letter moved through official channels, passing inspection before crossing borders, and this awareness shaped tone without eliminating sincerity. Sincerity can exist within limits when people learn how to express care and steadiness through careful phrasing. Many focused on describing routine, health, and small observations, knowing that such details reassured families more effectively than dramatic statements would. Calm language often carries greater comfort than intense emotion. Receiving letters also influenced how prisoners carried themselves during the days that followed, because confirmation from home could steady mood and reinforce perspective. Perspective matters in confinement, since it reminds individuals that their identity extends beyond immediate surroundings. Even brief references to familiar streets, workplaces, or family habits helped rebuild mental images that might otherwise fade. Some prisoners began organizing their saved letters carefully, stacking them in chronological order or tying them together with string, treating them as records of continuity rather than mere paper. Records create narrative, and narrative helps people understand long experiences as chapters rather than as a single endless stretch. When experiences can be placed in order, they become easier to endure. Not every exchange brought equal comfort, since news from home could include shortages, uncertainty, or changing circumstances, yet even difficult information grounded imagination in reality. Grounded reality is often steadier than imagined extremes. Knowing specifics, even limited ones, reduces the mental strain caused by unanswered questions. The camp administration maintained the same procedural approach, collecting, inspecting, and distributing mail without commentary, reinforcing that correspondence remained part of regulation rather than favor. Regulation applied consistently supports stability in large groups, and stability benefits both administrators and those confined. The prisoners learned to navigate this stability rather than resist it. Over time, writing letters became a habit woven into weekly life, anticipated quietly and completed with focus. Anticipation divided time into measurable segments, and measurable segments helped prevent weeks from blending into abstraction. Even when delays occurred, the expectation of future exchange provided a forward-looking element within confinement. By the later stages, correspondence stood as one of the most structured links between the fenced yard and the wider world, demonstrating how systems can allow controlled communication without removing boundaries. The letters did not change their status, yet they reinforced identity and continuity, showing that connection could persist through regulated channels. In this way, The steady movement of paper across distance became another example of how routine and structure shaped daily life, where measured words carried reassurance across borders while larger events unfolded far beyond the camp. In the end, the letters did not remove the fences, did not shorten the war, and did not eliminate uncertainty about the future, yet they became one of the most meaningful structured elements in daily camp life, because they carried voices across distance in a way that routines alone could not. What began as hesitation before a blank page slowly became part of the rhythm that divided long stretches of confinement into manageable intervals. The prisoners had arrived expecting silence from the outside world, imagining that captivity would isolate them completely, and discovering that regulated correspondence continued under inspection quietly challenged that assumption. The system was controlled and limited, yet it functioned consistently, and consistency allowed expectations to form. Expectations reduce uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty helps the mind remain steady. Writing required discipline, patience, and careful language, while waiting demanded trust in schedules that moved beyond their sight. Both processes shaped how the men organized their thoughts and measured time. Each letter written and each reply received formed a link in a chain that stretched across borders, creating continuity even when circumstances could not be changed. Over months and years, memories of captivity were defined not only by restrictions and routines, but by the steady exchange of paper that confirmed families were still there, still reading, still responding. In that exchange, identity extended beyond camp records and assigned numbers, reconnecting men with roles as sons, husbands, fathers, and brothers. And so this story settles as a quiet example of how structured communication can exist even in confinement, showing that regulated systems do not entirely silence human connection. Within careful boundaries, measured words crossed distance and returned again, reminding the prisoners that while they lived behind barbed wire, their lives remained linked to a wider world that continued writing back. Thank you for spending this time here. If these quiet, true World War II stories matter to you, subscribing helps this channel continue.